All right. Well, Rick, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and take a seat. So how's it going?
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good.
Nothing to complain of in the past couple of weeks. Nothing new, I should
Thankfully,
say.
nothing new to complain of from the last couple of weeks.
And you've just been in the area for the last little while. What have you been doing to keep yourself entertained since you're away from home?
It's just been working.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part.
Good. Staying busy.
Yeah.
Good. Glad to hear it. I want to thank you for finding time in your, I'm sure you're busy, for finding time in your schedule to stop by again. Kind of the idea of this meeting is so that you and I can brainstorm a little bit. Since our last meeting, I've done some research into the law and kind of done some thinking about your circumstances. And I've come up with a few ideas on my own, but I think it's most important to hear what you think about these things, and again, to hear if you have any ideas or input as we talk about some of this stuff. So that's kind of the purpose of the meeting today, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And with that being said, I'd also just like to remind you that the attorney-client privilege still applies. Again, everything that we discuss stays between you and me, so there's no need to worry about confidentiality problems. So we can still speak freely in that way. And if you remember, which of course you do, because you've brought some of these documents with you, at the end of the last meeting, I asked you to bring some of your medical reports and the doctor's notes and the grant deed of your property. I have these here, so thank you for doing that. This is very helpful. And I also have this letter that your neighbor Joan wrote to you about meeting together with all the neighbors. Yeah. So again, I just want to thank you for bringing those in today. And just wanted to check, do you have any other documents that you brought with you that you want me to be aware of?
Not right now, no.
Okay, no problem. So before we begin, I just had a couple kind of initial questions, follow-up questions really, from our initial meeting, just to make sure that nothing new was developed, or to make sure that I understand everything as they are now. If I understand the letter right, it sounds like you met with some of your neighbors about your concerns that we've talked about. Do you remember how many neighbors attended that meeting?
Exactly, no.
Okay, no problem. But it was a handful of people at that. Okay. And beyond that, this is even a more general question, which it's fine if you don't know. Do you have any clear idea of how many people in general have been affected by this mine in a similar way that you have? Do you have any guesstimate?
I know like most of the people kind of involved with like our HOA in that area are upset. I don't know how negatively affected they've been. I know people are upset about, you know, a lot of this that's going on.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. Again, that's helpful. And finally, my last kind of follow-up question is, I understand you logged some sort of verbal complaint with Mount High. Was it after this meeting that you had with your neighbors?
Yes.
Okay, and you hadn't heard back from them then. Have you heard back from them now?
No, I haven't.
No response?
No.
That's unfortunate. Sorry to hear that. But again, that's I guess why we're here today, so we can try and make something happen, right?
Yep.
So that's okay too. So with that, I just kind of want to quickly, if it's okay with you, summarize my understanding of your situation once again. And as I do so, I'll try and be brief, but feel free to interject, interrupt, or tell me anything that I need to change, or anything that has changed since then. So as I understand it, you bought your home in 2004, that we talked about, and you were visiting each summer up until 2009.
Yeah.
You were diagnosed with the COPD in 2009, and that's what caused you to have to stay away from the home for about 5 years. And according to these medical reports, the initial cause of that COPD was some smoking habits. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And the mine reactivated in that same year, 2009, and it has been active ever since, which is the same year that you left.
Yeah, I left, no mine, come back 5 years later.
Right. That's a nice discovery to come back to.
Right.
Okay, and then again, the first time you returned since 2009 was 2014, so a 5-year period. Okay, and this is when you first noticed not only the mine, but that you noticed that same summer, 2014, the health and property impacts that it was having on you. Some of these things that we've talked about. Okay, and those things have included high dust levels that have made it hard for you to breathe, a damaged backyard river, and negative impacts on wildlife and the environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so with all that said, does that sound like a pretty fair summary of your situation?
Yeah, spot on.
Okay, great. So with that being said, then I also just wanted to kind of clarify your objectives, because that's probably the most important thing in this whole process, is understanding clearly what it is that you want. And I think that I do, because we talked about it extensively last meeting, but just for sake of clarity, as I understand, you have two kind of paramount objectives. The first being you want to enjoy your property. You don't want to move. You want to be able to sit on the porch and enjoy the black bears, the wildlife, and also breathe easily. And that, as far as I understand, is your kind of your number one objective. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. And the second one is, of course, that you're mindful of the environment, and you want to protect it, but also kind of hold Mountain High accountable for the impact that it's having on the environment, because it's important to you.
Definitely.
Is that fair? Okay. Has anything happened since then that has caused you to change your objectives, or any new information that's caused you to kind of revise them at all?
No, I would just say that both of those objectives are equal as far as my desire. Nothing's really changed or happened to change those objectives. I mean, everything that is happening in some really bad, dusty, hazy days. So it's just like, if anything's happening, it's just propelling me in the same direction of wanting to do these things.
With each passing day of harder breathing, then I guess that's the change, that things are continuing to get worse.
Yeah. I did have to install all new air filters.
Oh, you did?
So that even if I want to be inside,
it's probably getting through all the cracks and probably even getting on your counter. And that probably wasn't easy or cheap either, was it? No. Has that helped?
It's helped, like being inside.
Okay.
On those like bad days, you know.
Well, I'm glad that you kind of formed a respite in that way. I'm sorry that you've had to take that upon yourself, though.
Sure.
I guess it's nice that you have that option, but well, hopefully some of this stuff will give us even some more helpful avenues to take with that. So now I kind of want to jump into the most important part of this little meeting that we have, which is to go over some of the possible solutions that I've come up with. And as I see it, you have three fairly viable legal options. We'll talk about some non-legal options as well, but I first just kind of want to explain these three legal options. Those are private nuisance.
Mind if I take notes?
Yeah, and in fact, thank you for mentioning that. I was planning to offer you this. You can do it on your phone if you'd like, or on paper, whichever is easiest to you.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, I was planning to invite you to do that because some of this can be kind of feel like a lot of information. So feel free to jot down ideas that you have, concerns that you have. If something doesn't make sense to you, you can interrupt me or write it down.
Cool.
Whatever comes to mind.
Thank you.
And so those three things, again, would be private nuisance, a public nuisance, and trespass.
Okay.
So then I kind of want to explain these as concisely as possible to you. The first option of private nuisance, it's kind of a three-part rule that if we were to go with this, we would have to prove three different things. The first is that we have to prove what's called an actual interference with the use and enjoyment of your property. I don't think that'll be a problem for us, and I'm sure you would agree, that there has been interference with your use and enjoyment of property. Courts have even said that really almost any conceivable problem or annoyance satisfies this part of the rule. And so I don't think that's really going to give us much problem. We just have to prove that part. Because you've had dust on the property, you've got a damaged backyard river, you've got wildlife that is suffering, you've heard loud noises, you've even installed this new air filter that you've talked about. We do have evidence of an actual interference with your use and enjoyment of property. And I think that's fairly clear. So that shouldn't be a problem. The second part of the rule requires that same interference must be quote unquote substantial. Substantial is kind of a vague word, I know. And I guess the best way to describe that is courts have said that when we're determining whether an interference is substantial, we just look at what that interference, what effect that interference would have on the average person in the community. And that's really kind of all there is to it. I think we have fairly clear evidence of that as well, because we've got your neighbors that have complained of similar things. So that suggests that average people in the area don't like these annoyances, don't like the dust, don't like the deposit from the river and loud noises and the impacts on the environment. So I think that's fairly clear too. However, what makes this second part of the rule a little trickier is that we can't consider idiosyncrasies of individuals in determining whether the harm is substantial. So in your case, you have this, terribly difficult disease, COPD, that has impacted you in an extra negative way because the dust makes it so you can't breathe, which makes this case all the more important. But at the same time, that is probably not going to be considered in this analysis because the average person in the area most likely doesn't have COPD. Does that make sense? I know. So that's, that's one of the harder parts about that part of the rule is we can't say, yes, this is substantial because Rick can't breathe, yes, COPD. We have to say Rick is suffering from dust buildup in his home, from the river, from the wildlife, those kind of things. So we still have an argument, but it's a little bit trickier because of that. Okay. The third and final part of this rule requires that same interference must be unreasonable. Again, another vague word, but really all courts have said that means is that in determining whether it's unreasonable, we use a balancing test. What we balance is the benefits of the activity, which in this case could be the creation of new jobs, the bolstered economy, increased tax revenues, the new recreation center. The benefits of the activity are weighed against the harms that it causes, right? And in this case, those are significant harms, and that's what we've talked about. Now we're talking about the dignity and importance of private home ownership, of enjoying your property. I mean, in America, we value these kind of things. And so those are no small problems. But it could become tricky to outweigh all the economic benefits that the mine has brought. And so that's something to consider too. Do you have any questions about those three parts of the rule?
No. I mean, that all makes pretty good sense there. That unreasonable stipulation there. I mean, that's something that I've thought about and considered here too. Is that I'm not blind. I do see the positive impacts that this has brought to the community. I mean, you should have seen the town 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, before the start of that. So I definitely understand and see that it has been a good thing on a lot of levels, right? So I just wanted you to know, like, I'm not blind and arrogant for that's what I'm looking for.
The benefits are not lost on you.
Yeah.
And that's helpful. And that's actually, I remember that from our last meeting. And so I also wanted to talk about some of the pros and cons of some of these options.
Sure.
And I've considered that very fact that you just mentioned in those pros and cons. So thank you for reminding me of that. I also just wanted to make a note of the likelihood that I think I see with this private nuisance claim. It strikes me that we have about probably a 55% chance of prevailing on a private nuisance claim. And again, that's higher than 50%, but it's not as high as it could be, right? And I think largely the reason it's not higher is because of some of those difficulties that you've just identified. A lot of the benefits that it brings to the economy and the fact that we can't consider COPD in the substantial part of the analysis.
Kind of a random question. How does one come up with a percentage rate like that?
That's not an exact science. That's something that I've personally come up with based
Okay.
upon the research that I've done in preparation for this meeting.
Gotcha.
What I've done and what lawyers usually do is they consider all the facts of a situation, then they find the relevant law and they apply the facts to that law. And we just try and come up with kind of a ballpark guess or idea of what's worth pursuing. And so again, it's not exact, so I don't want you to take it as.
But it's I see that, so it's pretty
Does
good
that kind of make
estimate.
sense? Yeah, that's kind of my personal estimate for
Okay.
you that we can consider when we're looking through some of this stuff.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And so with that, again, there are some pros and cons that I just wanted to highlight for us with the private nuisance claim. It does give us the option to stop or limit the mine's activity. And so prevailing on the claim would help you realize your main goal of enjoying your property, because this cause of action contemplates slowing down the interference or completely shutting it down altogether. And that kind of considers what you were saying before, you may not want to shut down the mine altogether because it provides benefits to the community.
Yeah.
And so that's something to consider too when we're talking about some of these pros and cons, is whether it can continue to run at a reasonable rate. Another pro, and I know your main objective is not money, but it does give us the option of monetary award, which you could use to repair your property or do whatever, maybe to reimburse the air filters that you've put into your home. That option is there. And so that's probably something to be mindful of. Some of the cons, however, are that if we do prevail and it does halt mine altogether, there might be some negative economic impact, which is what you've highlighted. So it's a potentially negative consequence to be aware of. And in connection with that, there may be some community members who don't like that. Some people might rely on the mine economically. It's influenced a lot of people, and it's done a lot for the community. So there's a risk of people being unhappy if we prevail on this, and you could be associated with that. Finally, litigation, if this were to go to litigation, it can be expensive, it can be stressful, and it takes time. So some things to consider. Are there any upsides or downsides that have come to your mind with that particular option?
So far, just a lot of those cons that you mentioned. I know for a fact that the economic impacts on the area have been substantial. I don't want to screw with that. So like, if that's the only possible solution, in a successful private nuisance claim or whatnot, whatever you call it, then I wouldn't necessarily want to go that route. I think just if, those, does it outweigh, my issues with the dirt? And no, it doesn't. I don't know how many people they employ, probably thousands of people, relying on feeding their kids. So I definitely don't want to, I don't want to be the cause of that. If they shut down for some other reason, that's their problem, but I don't want to be the one
To make them completely shut down.
Yeah. I'm more concerned with them trying to, I don't know.
Take some accountability for something like this, right?
So obviously there are pros and cons there, but so far, I'd like to hear the other options.
Okay. Well, that's good, because that's what I like to share with you. And thank you for clarifying that for me. That like I said, I was fairly confident that you didn't want to necessarily shut it down all the way, but I'm glad to know that for sure moving forward. So, and I think we do have some things that can help us achieve that. So the second legal option that I thought of is what's called a public nuisance. It's, as you might imagine, very similar to a private nuisance. It's again a 3-part rule that we must satisfy. The difference, however, is that the first part of the rule requires that we show an interference on multiple people, whereas in the private nuisance claim, it's just on you.
Right.
The second and third parts of the rule, they're the same essentially. They require that the interference be substantial and unreasonable. We're talking about weighing the benefits against the harms. So those things stay the same.
So that all the all that still applies here to the second option.
To the second option, the second and third parts. But again, what's different is that we have this first part of the rule that requires multiple people be affected. And what courts have said is that in their language, it must affect a considerable number of people. And so I think that leaves us a little room to wiggle. And I also think we have a pretty good chance at proving that because, as you said, you met with your neighbors about this.
Right.
And you said there was more than one. There was probably a considerable number of people there. And you said that some other HOA members have voiced some concerns with this. So with that being said, I think the first part of this public nuisance claim gives us a pretty good shot at satisfying that. And then again, go ahead.
So as far as this public nuisance claim goes, correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding here. So I know plenty of other people that are interested in, suing with me if it gets to that. And I just wanted to know, as far as a public nuisance claim, is that me alone, or is that multiple people suing with me that you'd be representing as well?
Well, I would still just be your attorney, so I represent you. Something to consider with that is I don't necessarily want to, and I'm probably not able to represent a whole large number of people at the same time as I represent you, because that could pose a potential what we call conflict of interest. Are you familiar with that phrase at all?
Yeah.
I mean, it's essentially what that means is, say I represent you and your neighbor Sally and your neighbor Joe all at the same time. Down the road, if not at the beginning, your interests may diverge. And if that were the case and I'm representing all three of you, now all of a sudden we have a problem. Because if, for example, you don't want to shut down the line because you're mindful of its economic benefits, but Sally wants to shut it down completely without hesitation, then I'm kind of stuck not knowing what to do. And I might have to withdraw from representation or all sorts of things. So to answer your question, I'll just be representing you so that I can focus on your interests and so that I'm not being distracted by other people's concerns, and so that we don't have those potential conflicts of interest.
Okay.
Does that kind of answer your question?
That answers definitely the first part of it. As far as, public nuisance claim, that's me as an individual then filing, is it like on behalf of me and other people?
Great question. And in a way, you could say that. What's interesting about public nuisance is that typically it requires, in a lot of cases, a public official brings the suit because it's on behalf of the public. In your case, however, we have an opportunity to bring as an individual, and that's because there's a little idiosyncrasy in public nuisance that allows for a private person to bring a public nuisance if that private person is suffering an injury that is different from the injuries that the public is suffering from.
Okay.
So essentially what that means is, in your case, you can't breathe. You're struggling to breathe on your property because of your condition. That dust is causing a different harm to you than it is to your neighbors. Your neighbors, they're probably suffering from dust buildup. Maybe they're complaining just general dust buildup on the porch, maybe even in their windowsill or in their yard. But that's different from your harm of not being able to breathe.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Definitely.
So because of that, as long as we can show that you are suffering from a different harm, a harm that is different in kind, not just merely different in degree, but different in kind, then we could go ahead and bring that suit as an individual.
Okay.
And so with those last two questions, like I sent your question, I would continue to represent you as an individual, nobody else, not the neighbors in this matter. It would be on behalf of the public in a sense, but it would be as you as an individual because you're suffering a unique sort of harm.
Okay.
Does that kind of answer the question?
Okay, for that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And again, continue to let me know any questions that you might have.
That's also part of my leave, so
Well,
I do appreciate
that's
the
understandable. No, not at all. So with all of that being said, I think we do have a fairly high chance of success. I would say probably about a 75% chance of prevailing on a public nuisance claim because of those things that we've talked about. we've got people, considerable number of people who have shown that they're being interfered with. You have this different kind of harm that we can demonstrate. And essentially, I think we have a pretty, about a 75% chance of prevailing. Again, that's not exact, but it's higher than 55%. With that being said, just again, some pros and cons to consider. With a public nuisance claim, it contemplates this slowing down the activity that we're talking about, and that would perfectly satisfy what you're talking about as far as enjoying your property but not destroying the mine altogether. So that is a pro, and I think it fits pretty comfortably in your objectives. However, a potential con is, again, litigation can be expensive. It can be time consuming, it can be stressful.
Yeah.
It's, may not always be 100, last forever. And in this case, because we have a 75% chance of prevailing, give or take, it may not take as long, but still litigation, it's not always, the easiest thing to do. Yeah. And again, public nuisance, it doesn't contemplate private money damages. You've stated that you're not highly concerned with money awards, so that shouldn't be too big of a problem, but it's just something to take a note of. But public nuisance doesn't provide private money damages. With that being said, do you see any other upsides or downsides to this option?
The biggest upside is that it, isn't primarily trying to shut down the mine.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely the main draw there. And the fact that, there's obviously a higher percentage rate of success due to the fact that it's based on public, just me.
Right.
So those are definitely the draws there.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. And with that in mind, I think best case scenario is just that. We limit the activity, it continues to run and benefits the economy, and you're able to enjoy your property. Worst case, there's always a worst case scenario. Worst case scenario would be we go to court, we lose the cost of representation, of legal representation. And potentially, people in the community connect you with this idea of trying to take away the mine from their area.
Perception is key.
Perception. So I think that's not necessarily likely, but worst possible scenario is something to consider. And again, best possible case scenario would probably be just about right.
Just going along that note of losing cost of representation, if we were to be successful with that, does that mean that then Mountain High pays all legal fees? Or what does that mean?
Typically, that's within a court's discretion, and that's possible. That's a possibility. At the end of the litigation, again, that's usually within the court's discretion to decide, okay, who do I award attorney's fees? A lot of times courts will say, okay, prevailing party, I'm going to award you attorney's fees, and that means that I'm going to require the other side to pay whatever you paid in bringing this suit. Typically, that's because you've obviously brought a legitimate cause of action. Okay. And but again,
it's circumstantial.
It's kind of circumstantial, and that's more so for the court to decide than for me to predict. But it is a possibility.
Okay. Cool.
Which would be nice. And with these odds, I think we have a fairly good chance of that becoming a reality. So. So yeah, do you have any other questions about the nuisance claims at all?
No.
Okay. Finally, with our third legal option, and I'll be brief on this. It's an idea I was thinking of. It's called trespass, and we talked about this a little before. Essentially, all it requires is that Mountain High or whoever's activity we're talking of, engage in conduct that involved an unreasonable risk of invading your property. And then that risk ended up causing actual harm to your property. Essentially, I think we have a chance at that, probably about a 51% chance, maybe a little more likely than not, but not much. It makes it a little tricky because Mountain High is 2 miles away from your home. And so anything that they did to dump stuff in the river that might not be considered an unreasonable risk of invading your private property because it's kind of a secluded area. But rivers don't just stop at 2 miles, so there is a risk of that. So I think it's feasible, but again, probably about a 51% chance of that happening. And the second part of the rule, I think, is fairly easy because again, we can establish actual harm to your river and as you've demonstrated to your home with the dust. With that, I think one of the pros of that is that it contemplates money damages, but that's it.
Okay.
So there's the con on the flip.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't get at what you said is most important to you. So that's a pretty significant con, is that it awards money damages potentially, but nothing else. So those are some of the legal things that I've considered.
Okay.
Have any other legal options occurred to you in the course of the last couple of weeks?
No, like I said, I have no idea how to do this.
No problem. That's why I'm here, hopefully to help, right?
Yes, sir.
And just something to keep in mind with any of those potential options, if we were to go with any of them, I would go ahead and initiate the process by filing a claim in court, and then we just wait for Mountain High to respond and we'd go from there. So that's kind of how the rubber would meet the road. But before we kind of talk about that, there are a couple of non-legal options I wanted to run through with you, if that's okay. So non-legal options can be really helpful too, because they avoid the cost of litigation. They avoid some of the stress of legal routes. With that being said, are you familiar with kind of how zoning laws work at all in areas?
Yeah.
A little bit. Okay. So the first thing that I thought about is we could petition the city zoning committee in Ridgeview to try and prohibit certain types of commercial activity in the area, because the mine would qualify as commercial activity. Now, the mine have an interest in maintaining a positive rapport with the community, so I would think, that this would be important to them, and that we should probably be able to get their attention. But you can't be certain. I think this is a little harder to give you a likelihood or percentage on, because it's not a legal remedy, but I think we have about a 55 to 60% chance of this yielding some positive fruit for us, petitioning the city zoning committee. One of the pros I see with this option is that, again, it would enable you, if we're successful, to enjoy your property. If we can convince the zoning committee to rezone the area to at least maybe even just limit the amount of mining activity that's allowed in the area, if they could designate it as residential. On the flip, if they did designate it as completely residential, then the mine would have to shut down, and we don't want that, as you've said. So that's something else to consider. We also face the possibility that people in the community and people on that zoning committee won't agree with you,
Right.
because they love the mine and what it's done for the area, and so we might face a little bit of harm to the reputation in that sense. Do you see any particular upsides or downsides with this option about petitioning the city zoning committee to try and rezone this a little bit?
I just don't see it working.
Okay.
For that last reason that you mentioned.
Because it poses a risk of
Because I mean, it's obvious the economic impact that the mine has had.
Right.
So the city's not going to say, "See ya, thanks for your help."
Right. Yep. That's a very good point. The people on the committee are people who are in the community and people who are aware of the benefits bring. So with that said, then I really only have one more non-legal thought or suggestion as far as an option goes, and that's that we could arrange a meeting with Mountain High executives. And at that meeting, we could do a number of different things. We could try and develop an environmental conservation plan. We could talk about ways to limit their activity. There are a lot of different things that we could do. And again, Mountain High, it's a significant employer in the area, and so they have an interest in maintaining a positive rapport at the community. So I think we have a higher percentage of that working out, probably about a 65 to 70% chance of something positive coming from that meeting. And I know you've reached out to them yourself already, but perhaps with my help, and I could help you go to the meeting or draft a letter, or, whatever you're most comfortable with.
Would it be you arranging the meeting, calling them, or would it be me?
Well, it depends on what you're most comfortable with. I would probably suggest you arranging the meeting initially, unless you would like me to do it, because I can go with you to the meeting as well. And if, you know, if I were to make the call and actually go with you, that might add a little bit of extra oomph to our meeting, right? And in fact, you've already reached out to Mountain High, so on second thought, it's probably best if I go ahead and reach out to them. If this is an option that you think is worthwhile, I could reach out to them as your attorney, and hopefully that would get them to respond a little bit more quickly. And then I could go with you to that meeting, and we can talk with them about some options that would satisfy your objectives and their concerns. Do you see any particular upsides or downsides with that option?
I mean, you use the phrase environmental conservation plan, which fits with my objectives pretty solid.
Okay.
And I mean, honestly, here, like, obviously, up with the public nuisance legal option, I mean, 75% chance of success. Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. But that's going to cost a lot of money. And I don't really want to spend a ton of money. I don't want to, I mean, I'm doing this. I kind of want, obviously, things to change. I like the property. I enjoy it. But on the flip side, you know, if this is a problem that's going to keep persisting, then it's in my best interest to obviously try to sell the property, probably take a loss, and find something that suits my needs a little bit better. You know, but if I can, I want to help try to make a difference in, you know, the area, the community that I love, if it's possible, without spending a fortune and without, you know, years of stress and without having to leave. I mean, if that's possible, I want to do that. So far, from what you're explaining to me, you know, this last option, meeting with the executives and trying to put together some form of, you know, conservation there, without spending ridiculous amounts of money at the same time. Seems like that fits my vision a little bit better at this point. And if that doesn't yield positive fruit, then the options are obviously pursue more aggressive legal action or sell the property and go somewhere else.
Okay. So if I understand you right, then you want to first pursue a non-legal option.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Just, yeah.
And you think that this meeting with Mountain High executives is most likely to satisfy your objectives?
Is there any way that is there any way we could get kind of like a public coalition type thing going on with this as well? So it's not just me and you going in there saying, hey, we want these changes, but that there's like a petition we go around, or is there any way to get more people involved so that there's more weight brought to the claim? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, that was one of the things that I was going to ask you to help me with.
Cool.
If this is something that you're comfortable doing, is trying to meet with Mountain High, again, I can help, you know, arrange that meeting. One of the things that I would ask you to try and do as part of your homework is to contact your neighbors, whether it be those that were at the meeting or others that you haven't necessarily talked with already. Contact your neighbors to see who would be willing to attend this meeting with us. And again, I can go with you. I won't represent them, I'll represent you, but like you said, they could come with us to give us a little added leverage. And if you could do that and get kind of just a general idea of who's willing to go with us, how many people, and what ways they've been impacted by this, if you could call me and let me know what you found, then I can go ahead and, you know, be in my homework on this end.
Okay.
Is that something that you think you'd be comfortable doing, is kind of reaching out to a few of your neighbors?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Okay. And again, like you said, I think that would help, because then it would be more than just two people walking into the executive office. We'd have more with us. Even if we just had information, you know, it would help.
Okay.
In the meantime, then, if you're able to do that, my homework would be, once you've called me, I could go ahead and contact Mountain High and arrange the meeting. And again, I think to restate, I think that would probably be best if I go ahead and reach out to them as your legal representation. And then once we arrange that meeting, I'll be in contact with you to let you know when they're willing to meet, and then I'd go ahead and meet up with you and whoever else is willing to go, and we go sit down and try and work something out with them as amicably as possible. And I think some of the pros to this option are that we avoid litigation. Like you said, it's less expensive, it's less time consuming, less stressful, it's more friendly, and you could that probably protects your, your reputation in the area a little bit better, because it's a friendly way of going about this, and you have others in the community who agree with you. On the flip side, we don't have as much court-ordered backing for what comes from this. Say we do come to an agreement, it's not as if a court has just rendered a ruling, so we don't have that legal backing from an actual judge in a court. So that's something to consider, but there are pros and cons to everything. So does that sound like an approach that you feel
That
comfortable?
definitely sounds like a good place to start, just from the way you've explained it.
Okay. Well, then we can go ahead and do that. And if for some reason things change along the way, we can always consider other more forceful options, as you've said, whether that be other legal options or whatever. But if they seem to meet your objectives, if this option meets your objectives, we can go ahead and begin with this. So that's what I'll do. In the meantime, you contact your neighbors and try and gather that information. And once you're able to, excuse me, if you could reach out to me, I'll then contact Mountain High, and we'll arrange a time to go to that meeting, and we'll see what we can accomplish. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Do you have any other questions or concerns for me about anything at all?
Not really at this point. I just want to thank you for being so patient with me.
Oh,
And
not at all.
very clearly and concisely explaining all of this.
No, I know it's tricky. I'm newly out of law school, and I'm still learning some of this stuff, so I can appreciate that it gets a little tricky sometimes. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me again. I'm in my office from 8 to 5 every day, and I can return any calls or emails within 24 hours. Just as a reminder, if anyone does approach you about this, I would just ask you to refer questions or concerns to me first as your legal representation. That way we can, just continue with this kind of formal process and make sure that it all stays intact. Finally, if there's nothing else, and no other questions you have, we'll probably want to meet one more time in the next couple of weeks. I can't be positive when that will be, because we've got a little bit of work to do from now till then. Is it okay if I reach out to you, kind of like we did this last time, and just try and arrange that over the phone?
Definitely.
Okay, then I'll keep that in mind, and you have my contact information. If anything before then comes to mind, then you reach out to me. If not, then I'll go ahead and we'll go from there. Okay, that sound okay?
Sounds good.
All righty, thanks, Chris. Thank you for coming in, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
I appreciate your time.
I'll show you the door.